Number 1. The pool. Now this happened a very long time ago. I'm not going to mention when or where though, and I'm submitting it anonymously. I don't want people going back and finding out more about it and then lashing out at me. I was 13 years old and my brother was 11. As I mentioned, this happened a long time ago, and I think today not a lot of parents would put a 13-year-old in charge of an 11-year-old. But this was not unusual at all back then. In fact, I was looking after my little brother all the time, before either of us even hit 10 years old. After a while, of course, always keeping my eye on him began to get very annoying. It interfered with my hanging out with friends. It was quite a drag when I would try to talk to girls. It was just a pain in the ass, really. Anyway, one day during a really hot summer, our parents decided to drop us both off at the local swimming pool for the day. My dad had to work and my mom had errands and stuff to run, plus work to do for her church. It was so hot and there was no way we could afford air conditioning. We had one old fan in the house and a sprinkler in the yard that we could go play in, but the swimming pool was a much better option. Of course, the pool was very crowded. Lots of families would drop their kids off there during the summertime. And of course, even though I knew it already, my mom stressed to me, keep an eye on your little brother at all times. Some of my friends were at the pool too. I got to talking to them and they told me about this new girl who moved into town. She would be starting school that fall, and supposedly she was really hot. So of course I wanted to check her out. I knew the lifeguards would be watching my brother in the water, so he would be fine. I went with the guys and the girl was really cute. My buddies all dared me to approach her, which was admittedly a brave thing for a 13-year-old boy to do. Of course I couldn't chicken out in front of them, so I did just that. She was a very sweet girl. We actually ended up talking for a little while. Her parents were at the pool though, and they called her back after too long. So I went back to the water to see how my little brother was doing. The only problem was that I couldn't see him anywhere in the water. This was a small town in a rural area, so although I said the pool was crowded, it wasn't like a water park is crowded though. I should have easily been able to pick him out of the water. He just wasn't there. I went and searched around the area surrounding the pool and didn't see him there either. My heart started beating faster and I began panicking. I went to the building where the showers and concession stand were. He wasn't there either. You couldn't leave that pool, though, without going through that building. So I asked the attendant if an 11-year-old boy had left the pool on his own in the previous hour, and he told me no. I then went to the lifeguards and my buddies. I thought maybe there was a chance that I had missed him. It's easy to occasionally miss someone in a crowd. The lifeguards ordered everyone out of the pool. Fortunately, there were no drowned children in the pool. Unfortunately, my brother was nowhere to be found outside of the pool. The lifeguards had to call my mother at the church. I had never before lost track of my little brother like this before. I had no idea what to expect when she showed up. I was only thankful that the police were already at the pool, or she probably would have whipped my ass right there in front of the entire pool. The trouble I got into at home isn't something that I want to go into very much. My butt very much has PTSD from the experience, but that was minor compared to the fear I felt for my little brother. Hell, I didn't even have time to feel guilty, although I knew that I was. I was only concerned for him and wondering what would happen. All day and all night, I expected the police to bring him home, but that didn't happen. I expected it the next day too, but it didn't happen. The town organized a search to look for him. I kept expecting to hear from them that they had found him, but that didn't happen either. After about a week of my brother not being found, I began fearing the worst. I began thinking that he was dead, and I was terrified every waking moment of my life, expecting to absolutely hear the news that his dead body had been found. Nearly 2 weeks after the disappearance, we got a phone call from the police. They had found my brother, and thankfully he was alive. But unfortunately, that's not the whole story. Remember the attendant telling me that no boy had left on his own? Well, that's because the boy left with one of the lifeguards who was getting off duty. He had lured my brother out of the pool and into his car with promises of ice cream, something he and I rarely got, and my brother went to his house with him. For all that time, he kept my brother locked up in his basement. He didn't do anything sexually to him, thank God, but there was a lot of mental and some physical torment when my brother wouldn't do what he was told to do. But the scariest part for him was thinking he would never get out and be with his family again. Here is another weird part. The lifeguard wasn't an adult. He did this while his parents were out of town for a few weeks. They came back early and caught him. And if you think I felt bad for my parents punishing me, what they did to him was legendary. The police thought he was either planning on killing or releasing my brother before his parents got home, but no one ever knew for sure. He had to live with it without much help for a long time. Mental health assistance had a very bad stigma back then, but we're both still alive today, and he forgave me a long time ago. Number 2. Taking the garbage out. A few weeks ago I went outside at around 3 a.m. to move the garbage to the curb since pickup would be in the morning. I often do this in the middle of the night. I just tend to keep weird hours, and as the weather warms up for the summer, I find the warm nights preferable to the sweltering days. I'm not worried about bothering my neighbors since I don't use noisy bins, and all the houses right next to me are currently empty. I actually find the quiet of the neighborhood at night quite relaxing. Unfortunately, since I don't use bins, animals are able to get into the bags a bit easier, and while this doesn't happen often, it had happened on this night. So I was outside picking up the strewn around garbage and putting it into another bag when the silence of the night was suddenly broken by multiple police sirens. At first they seemed distant, and while they startled me, it was not at all unheard of to hear sirens at night here, but usually it would be one in the distance. Still bagging the garbage, I could tell it was multiple sirens and they were getting closer. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped again. There was just silence. By the time they stopped, they sounded maybe 4 blocks away. For a moment the night was silent again, and I began hauling the bags to the curb when the neighborhood dogs began barking all at once. It was like every dog in the neighborhood had gotten the cue to start barking. Many were even howling. It continued for maybe a minute, and once again it just stopped, as suddenly as it had started. I realized I hadn't heard any barking or howling while the sirens were going, and that's normally how it would work. These dogs had started up separately from the sirens, and just stopped all at once. It just wasn't normal. I went back to the side of the house to grab more bags, when the silence was broken a third time. Just a single chime in the night, like someone getting a phone notification. The sound wasn't blocks away. The sound was here. Right here, no more than a few feet away. As I said, the houses around me are empty. I was done. The rest of the garbage would wait until morning. I didn't see anyone close by, but that just made it worse. There was someone close by that I couldn't see. I immediately went into the house to leave the garbage for the morning. Now, I don't know if these things are related. If the cops have been chasing someone who's fleeing, who had caused the dogs to bark, someone who received a message on their phone as they approached my house, or if it was all just a coincidence. But I won't be taking the garbage out at 3 a.m. anymore. Number 3. A Commuter's Nightmare. Back in the 80s, I worked at the Wyrm Memorial Blood Bank in San Francisco, while living and commuting from Oakland, California. My job as registrar took me all over Northern California during blood drives at hospitals, clinics, major corporations, etc., where we would sometimes witness firsthand the dead being placed on gurneys, running out of the coroner's or medical examiner's rear doors and down the sidewalks because they simply didn't have enough room or staff inside the morgues to process them. Mortuaries were having problems too, due to the massive overload where deceased loved ones were admitted, but not processed or interred for months or even years at a time. I remember watching the news and reading newspaper accounts of ERs and hospitals, clinics, etc., so clogged with patients that 1 in 10 would die waiting to just get in to see a doctor. It was a public health and safety nightmare. It was a national disgrace. It was politically orchestrated mass murder. It was the RB purge of the 80s and 90s. I remember starting work early on one of the many blood drives. The AIDS epidemic was just getting started, and having to catch my first BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, train out of the station at around 4 a.m., where morning after morning I would witness hundreds of people sleeping on the benches, on the sidewalks, on the streets outside, waiting for it to open. Hundreds of others would be seen walking around like zombies in the early morning freeze. Amid the concomitant yelling, screaming, moaning, begging, and pleading, all of it looked like a newsreel of the death camps at Auschwitz. Many times I was woken at home in the middle of the night to the sounds of people howling and cursing outside my window at some real or imagined threat, either until the police came, which usually took them hours because they were spread so thin, or some tenant or other ran them off. I remember the time I woke up to the sound of a woman's voice begging in the early morning cold for someone to help her. She kept repeating it over and over, growing weaker and weaker until it was little more than a whisper. By the time I'd gotten up, armed myself with the steel-reinforced baton I'd purchased at a police supply store, and ran the 5 floors down to the ground floor, I found her sitting in a taxi, shivering from the 42-degree drizzle coming in off the Pacific. The cabbie told me it was all right. She was just cold and needed some place to rest and warm up. He'd drop her off at one of the nearby shelters. At the time, I was living in a local residence hall on Lake Merritt in Oakland, California, which was little more than a converted hotel from the San Francisco Oakland Gilded Age of the late 1920s. It had 5 floors and a penthouse with a capacity of about 200. I never saw it get much beyond about 30 residents. It sported a full kitchen, dining area, big screen TV, viewing room, swimming pool, and a recreation room with pool, football, and darts. I lived with a friend at the time on the 5th floor just under the penthouse. There was an elevator, but like most refurbs, it didn't work. That meant we'd have to climb 10 flights of stairs every day to reach our room. The best part was that we had the entire floor to ourselves. I guess nobody wanted to climb that many stairs. Because we're both runners, it was a little like running the 900 feet to the top of Angel Island, running across the Golden Gate Bridge and back, or running the 3.4 miles around Lake Merritt twice a day. Because there was no air conditioning, all the windows were left open during the summer months, but along with whatever cool air the San Francisco Oakland Bay would bring through the gaping, nearly wall-length vault, ceilinged windows, it was always accompanied by the teeming, screaming city of Oakland street den. Cabbies, buses, cars, trucks, vans, motorcycles, scooters, police sirens, ambulances, fire department, pedestrians, hustlers, druggies, break dancers, prostitutes, the homeless. Day or night, winter or summer, it was like living in a jet engine test lab somewhere on the 9th level of hell. But of course we could always close the windows against the noise 5 stories below. But if it was summer, with all the humidity coming off the bay, we'd roast like 2 suckling pigs in our own sweat, even if we had used a fan. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, I came home, climbed Mount Everest, or at least K2, to my steaming little abattoir, tore off my sports jacket, shirt, and tie, and fell into a coma-like sleep, only to awake some 4 hours later to the sound of someone slamming the door over and over, seemingly as hard as they could. It was about 2 a.m., and raining so hard the water was pouring through the open window and flooding the floor and carpet. The sound was coming somewhere down the hall, from one of the other units. After the 15th or 16th slam to my inner ear, I was up, as in a trance, running like a lunatic from unit to unit and window to window, covering the entire south side of the 5th floor, battening down the hatches, and getting drenched in the process. It was, how should I say, exhilaratingly infuriating. I was supposed to get up in 2 hours and commute to work in the Upper Peninsula. Having unconsciously completed this Sisyphean task, and realizing that there was 0 chance of getting any sleep, I donned my foul weather gear, equipped my trusty baton — I used to tuck its 2.5-foot length up my sleeve when running — and headed out the front door to Lake Merritt, which was just outside the main entrance. From there I trotted to the sidewalk, circling the lake, and began to run. As I ran counterclockwise against a torrential rain, with a gale-force wind broken only by the occasional intermittent rainbow-hued lightning flashes, which blinded me to almost everything around me, I almost ran into someone, up ahead, who was walking in the same direction. He was hunched over against the wind and rain, and wearing a long, heavy winter coat. Unusual for that time of year, I thought. Whenever I would run into public, I always made it a courtesy to let people know when I was approaching, especially from behind. I blurted out a perfunctory, "Excuse me," followed by a conciliatory, "Sorry." But apparently the person ahead either didn't hear me or didn't care, because when I was about 6 feet from him, he suddenly turned around, exposing a darkened, contorted face, jagged teeth, and a guttural growl that would have stopped a charging 600-pound grizzly. The sheer force of the malevolence emitted from this inhuman thing almost made me stop, but because I was moving so fast, the inertia, along with the gale-force wind and lightning strikes, propelled me past him, or it, and fingering my steel-reinforced baton, I, in turn, steeled my nerve, and kept running. I looked back only once to reassure myself that he, or it, wasn't following. Running on the leeward side now, with the rain at my back, I ran past a group of men in a circle, smoking or drinking or doing whatever noxious or illicit thing I imagined, when feeling charged with my own adrenaline, or the anger and resentment at that woman's soaring pleas for help, or the spook I'd almost run into, or just the gross injustices thrown upon the world in that dank, dark, and dangerous time, I almost stopped, baton in hand, intending to take on the whole gang. I may go down, I told myself, but at least I would take 1 or 2 with me. Just then the lightning struck particularly close to where I and they stood, and the sheer blinding flash and concussive boom shook all of us enough to break up their conspiratorial collaboration and my righteous crusade. Just enough, that is, to shove me headlong around the next bend, to the long, straight, full-out dash to the front doors, the 5 floors, 10 landings, and 50 risers to rain-sodden home. To get to work every day, I'd have to commute to the Upper Peninsula by using 3 buses, 1 train, and 1 cab, and after 10 or 12 or sometimes 14-hour days, I would have to take the same to get back. That meant if I didn't go out to make dinner, eat, or watch TV, I just might get about 4 hours sleep. Commuting took between 2 to 3 hours one way. Once on the way home, almost every stop was crowded with commuters. I was told it was because there were so many buses down for repair. The ones still running were so filled beyond capacity that the shocks and springs were sitting on the chassis, and stop after stop proved nearly impossible to take on any more passengers. Still, and despite the few getting out at every stop, the driver would take on even more and just pack them in. I remember him yelling for people to get back behind the yellow line over and over. By then he was long past any semblance of reason, his patience frayed to a single maniacal thought, his voice raspier and raspier, his manner more and more brusque. I can still see where he finally lost it, jumping up out of his seat, and with a nickel-plated .38 caliber revolver pointing at one of the passengers, an elderly woman, screaming from the top of his lungs, "Get back behind the yellow line!" I can still hear the woman begging the driver, "Please," while the passengers behind were practically trampling over each other to get out of the line of fire. I remember the sad, exhausted urgency in her voice. She really was trying to move back, but how could she, an old woman, do that with all those people blocking her way? Everyone knew this was just an impossible task. Everyone except the maddened driver. He just kept glaring and bellowing with his gun out, pointed right at her and the other passengers. "Back up and make room," he yelled. Or else what, I thought, you're gonna kill an old woman? Getting out of my seat, pushing my way through the throng who were pushing up against me to get away, I managed to get within about 6 feet from the front when, roaring through the din of my anger and fear, I ordered the bus driver to put the gun down. And again, with even more rage and authority, "Put the gun down now!" The bus driver, shocked that it might be a cop or worse, shakily put his gun back in his concealed carry holster and hypnotically sat back down. He resumed driving without saying another word. I got out at the next stop, along with the elderly woman. She was so shaken. As she busted out crying, I held her, still fuming despite the close call, because I would now have to wait for another bus, and after that 2 more. The train and a cab to get home. I wasn't going to make it until well after 8 p.m. As soon as I got home, I reported the bus number and the driver to Muni. Many of the commuters I'd see day to day or share a seat with were victims of the purge, just trying to get out of the rain or the cold, or the wind, or the sun, even for just a little while. For them it was easing the agony of living on the street, even just a little. For many of us regular commuters, during those dark times, it proved to be the same. On one of the final buses that would take me to the train and across the bay, I remember standing, with about 50 others on Market Street waiting. Like ours, stop after stop was so packed with people, some were standing in the street because there was simply not enough room on the sidewalk. The ones in the street would stay where they were for fear of losing their place and missing their connection and having to wait another hour or more to catch another. Because the rapidly descending elevation of the southbound streets ending at Market Street from the Upper Peninsula were so steep and the transverse angle of the turn so sharp, some of the buses would skirt the edge of the curb, sometimes rolling up over it onto the sidewalk, putting them dangerously close to the commuters waiting on the other side. If there were any people in the street, especially the old or the infirm, they would either have to get out of the way and lose their place in line, or hope the bus driver stopped before completing the turn. Most of the drivers would, Once there was one who didn't. I remember the television and newspaper account about an elderly woman waiting at one of the stops during the PM rush hour. When the bus made the oblique turn way too fast at 25 miles per hour, she was either too close to the edge or standing in the street, and she was hit by the side mirror across the face and the left side of her head. She went down under the wheels, and her body got hung up under the chassis. The bus driver, too full of passengers to stop, or late for his break, or just too coked up to notice, kept on heading for the Embarcadero before he realized something was wrong. By then, the woman had been dragged over a quarter of a mile. No one knew for sure whether the concussion from the mirror or the relentless dragging was the cause of death. I guess it didn't matter to her anymore, one way or the other. It mattered to a lot of those who witnessed the whole thing, though, screaming and yelling, block after block, trying to get the bus driver to stop. To get across the bay to San Francisco from Oakland or back, one alternative to the nightmare bus commute was the Bay Area Rapid Transit. It was quite clean, air-conditioned, and fast. Traveling under the bay, it would span the 13 miles in minutes. Once I'd reached the station, by bus, from the Oakland side, I'd descend one of the many street-level entries to the below-ground turnstiles which led to the train platform. Of course, there were always hundreds of derelicts, homeless, hustlers, etc., hanging out by the turnstiles, waiting for their chance to slip through and get on any one of the many trains that service the Bay Area. But sometimes, especially after a scuffle with BART security or the San Francisco-Oakland police, they'd scatter to the winds, or the shadows, as it were, until everything calmed down, and they'd be back at it again day and night. Almost every week, I'd hear someone falling, or being pushed, or jumping down onto the third rail, which would either short-circuit the line and knock out the power, or if it was particularly grisly, halt service entirely. Because service resumption would take hours, waiting passengers would have to go back up and out onto the street and catch another train, take a cab, or a bus, or just walk, or, as was so often the case with me, run. Once I remember running to the next stop when I was ascending to the Upper Peninsula. Because the previous connection didn't show up, which meant it would have added another 45 minutes to my commute. The choice was obvious and inevitable. I could either wait to be late or go for it. I chose the latter. Just can't imagine what it's like to run a 20-degree angle uphill for about 2 miles while wearing dress slacks, dress shoes, a white shirt and tie, and a sports jacket in San Francisco during the summer with the humidity until you've tried it. It's how should I say, exhilaratingly infuriating. Running, I came upon a standalone transmission shop right in the middle of a residential area. The owners must have paid a pretty penny to get away with that one. There were police cars, the fire department, a metro ambulance, the San Francisco Chronicle, and a marked county coroner's office vehicle scattered around the shop. Some people, along with some of their employees, their first names embroidered on their shirts, were standing on the sidewalk, just outside the property watching. They'd been there for about an hour when I stopped to ask one of them, Bob, what happened. Wearily, he said, the girl who worked in the office, answering the phones and typing up orders, was shot to death by her boyfriend. The boyfriend got away, but she was still down there being processed. God, she was only 24 years old. They'll catch him, though. He hasn't got a chance. Nope, I thought. In this town, I don't expect he would. I was late again when I got home. Vaulting the 5 floors to reach our loft, I held my friend close the entire night. She was okay with that. And so was I.
Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below. or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.